It started with a tremor, a tiny, almost invisible shake in her hand as she reached for her coffee mug one quiet California morning. Meghan Markle, former duchess, actress, global icon, had no idea that single moment would mark the beginning of a terrifying chapter she could no longer control. For years, she had smiled for the cameras, fought off the tabloids, and pretended that the pressure didn't touch her. But that morning, something inside her finally broke. Have you ever wondered what happens when someone who's been holding everything together for too long finally lets go? When the perfect image cracks and the truth spills out. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because that's exactly what happened to Meghan. The world saw her as composed, glamorous, powerful. But behind closed doors, she was unraveling. The sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the constant fear that one misstep, one photo, one sentence would turn the world against her again. For years, Meghan fought to prove she was more than the royal headlines, more than the woman the British press loved to destroy. But no matter how far she ran, she couldn't escape the ghost of the crown. And now, doctors have confirmed what many feared but few expected. Meghan Markle has been diagnosed with a stress-induced neurological disorder, a condition directly linked to long-term emotional trauma. Her nervous system, exhausted, overloaded, and betrayed by years of mental strain, has begun to shut down. When the news broke, the world gasped. Not because it was shocking that she was unwell, but because it was shocking that it took this long for someone to see it. Years of pressure, years of pain. The crown broke me, Meghan reportedly told a close friend. And now I'm paying for it. Imagine living under the world's most powerful microscope. Every facial expression dissected. Every decision turned into an international scandal. Even her smile became political. Meghan's journey from Hollywood to the palace was supposed to be a fairy tale, but it became a cautionary tale of what happens when fame and royalty collide. But what no one realized is that this story isn't just about Meghan's health. It's about the unseen cost of emotional survival, about how trauma hides behind luxury, how pain can wear diamonds, and how silence can kill more slowly than any disease. At first, she tried to ignore the signs, the headaches, the dizziness, the strange numbness that came and went. She blamed it on stress, on long filming days, on the never-ending pressure to stay perfect. But the truth was far more sinister. The human body can only carry so much grief before it starts to collapse under its own weight. So when Meghan finally broke down, really broke down, it wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. Doctors have confirmed that her condition was triggered by chronic psychological stress, meaning that her brain and nervous system had been locked in survival mode for years. Her body was fighting an invisible war it could no longer win. Think about that. Every cruel headline, every online hate campaign, every cold shoulder from within the royal ranks, all of it left scars you couldn't see. And those scars became symptoms. But how did we get here? How did one of the most influential women in the world, someone who had everything, reach a point where her own body betrayed her? It's a question that's left not just her fans, but even some inside royal circles, shaken. The first signs appeared months before anyone noticed. Friends say Meghan started forgetting simple things, appointments, names, even parts of conversations. She would zone out mid-sentence, her voice trailing off. Harry thought it was exhaustion, maybe burnout. But when she fainted during a private dinner in Montecito, that's when everything changed. Rushed to a private clinic, Meghan underwent tests that revealed what she had been fearing all along. Her body was manifesting the pain she'd been suppressing for years. Doctors told her it was a neurological stress reaction, a condition caused by prolonged emotional strain that disrupts the brain's ability to regulate itself. In simple terms, the trauma she endured didn't just break her spirit, it rewired her brain. And yet, even in that moment, Meghan reportedly whispered, "Don't tell anyone. They'll turn it into a headline." That's the tragic irony of her story. The very fear of being judged kept her from seeking help sooner. The woman accused of playing the victim was too afraid to admit she was one. You have to wonder, if she were anyone else, would the world have been kinder? Would she have been allowed to heal in peace? Or is this what happens when your pain becomes entertainment for millions? Even now, the palace remains silent. No public statement, no acknowledgement. The same silence that once pushed Meghan to the edge has returned to haunt her again. But this time, the stakes are higher, because this isn't about image or reputation. This is about survival. Harry, sources say, is devastated. Watching Meghan crumble has reopened old wounds, the ghosts of his mother's suffering, the years of media intrusion, the same emotional chaos that consumed Princess Diana. For Harry, this isn't just a diagnosis. It's déjà vu. Friends close to the couple say Meghan has been receiving specialized therapy and neurological treatment. She's been told to avoid stress, a cruel recommendation for a woman whose very existence is synonymous with public scrutiny. Her circle has shrunk dramatically. Fewer public appearances, no interviews, a quiet retreat from the spotlight she once commanded with ease. But here's the contradiction. Meghan Markle has always been both adored and despised for the same thing, her strength. And now, that strength is both her curse and her salvation. Because while the headlines frame her diagnosis as a downfall, those who truly know her describe something else, rebirth. They say Meghan has finally stopped performing, finally stopped pretending. For the first time in years, she's letting herself be vulnerable. And maybe that's where the Real story begins. Because this isn't just about illness, it's about a reckoning. With herself, with the palace, with the public. It's about the woman behind the crown admitting that she can't carry it anymore. And yet, even as the world pities her, there's a quiet defiance in Meghan's silence. She's not begging for sympathy. She's reclaiming her humanity. This diagnosis might have shaken her, but it also stripped away the last illusion that she could ever be perfect. And perhaps that's her greatest act of courage yet. Still, the question remains, what happens next? How does someone rebuild when the world is waiting to watch them fall again? Because behind every medical report, behind every sympathetic headline, there's a deeper story no one is told. About the moments leading up to the breakdown. About the nights she cried alone, convinced she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. About the memories of palace walls that still haunt her dreams. And somewhere, deep down, Meghan herself wonders, was this her punishment for walking away from royalty? Or was it the price she had to pay for freedom? Whatever the answer, the road ahead will not be easy. Doctors warn that her recovery will depend entirely on one thing, peace. But for Meghan, peace has always come with a cost. Because when your name is Meghan Markle, peace doesn't mean silence. It means survival. And that's why, in the months ahead, her story is about to take a turn no one saw coming. Because this diagnosis wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of everything that had been hidden for years. And what happens next will not only test Meghan's strength, but expose the people and the system that broke her in the first place. Because sometimes, the body doesn't just fail, it tells the truth that the heart's been trying to hide. But when the truth finally came out, and Meghan was forced to face it head-on, it wasn't the illness that shocked her. It was where it all began. And that, right there, is where this story truly starts. It began long before the diagnosis, long before the clinic visits and sleepless nights. The signs were there, hidden in the glittering corridors of royal palaces and the cold smiles that lined every photo op. Meghan Markle's downfall, if you can even call it that, didn't start in California. It started in London, behind golden gates and centuries-old walls that have broken stronger people than her. Imagine walking into a world that promises you royalty but greets you with whispers instead. Imagine realizing that every compliment is double-edged, every handshake rehearsed, every word you speak dissected by people who don't want you there. That's what Meghan faced when she first became the Duchess of Sussex. From the outside, it looked like a dream. The royal wedding, the diamond tiara, the choir, the millions watching around the world. But from the inside, the pressure began that very day. Royal aides whispered about her American attitude. Senior courtiers described her as too outspoken. The tabloids painted her as demanding before she even opened her mouth. And Harry? He thought he could protect her from it. But no one protects anyone from the crown. Have you ever been in a room full of people smiling at you, knowing half of them want to see you fail? That was Meghan's life, every day. She tried to adapt, tried to play the role of the perfect duchess, elegant, quiet, graceful. But that wasn't who she was. The same independence that made her magnetic on-screen became a weapon against her behind palace doors. The same confidence that once won applause now drew scorn. Too modern, they said. Too confident. to Hollywood. And then came the headlines. Day after day, week after week. The British tabloids made her the villain in her own love story. Duchess Difficult, the American diva. Meghan made Kate cry. You remember that one, don't you? Only years later did the truth come out. It was Kate who made Meghan cry. But by then, the damage was done. The pressure began eating away at her sleep. At first, she would lie awake at night replaying every public moment. Every word she said to the Queen. Every gesture that could be misinterpreted. Harry tried to comfort her, telling her to block out the noise. But how do you block out the world when the world is your cage? Insiders say Meghan began to develop severe anxiety during her first pregnancy. There were whispers she was struggling emotionally. Some royal staff noticed her disappear for hours, locking herself away just to breathe. But instead of compassion, she got criticism. She's dramatic. She's unstable. She's making excuses. Those close to her remember how she tried to hide it. During official events, she'd smile so wide her cheeks would ache. Afterward, she'd cry silently in the car. She once told a friend, "They see my smile as arrogance. They don't see it's survival." That line haunts people now, because it was during this period that the seeds of her illness were planted. Psychologists say emotional trauma doesn't appear overnight. It builds like pressure under glass, waiting for the smallest crack to shatter it all. And the cracks came faster than anyone could fix them. The breaking point? The royal tour in South Africa. On camera, Meghan appeared radiant, confident, and engaged. But off camera, she was drowning. That now famous ITV interview revealed the truth. When the journalist asked if she was okay, her eyes welled up. "Thank you for asking," she said, her voice trembling. "Not many people have asked if I'm okay." That wasn't just an answer. It was a cry for help. The world saw vulnerability. The palace saw embarrassment. From that moment, the relationship between Meghan and the firm, as the royals call themselves, changed forever. The woman who had once been seen as an asset was now a liability. Behind closed doors, aides debated how to handle her. She was too emotional, too outspoken, too unpredictable. Words that have been used for generations to dismiss women in pain. Harry was torn. He wanted to defend her, but his own family warned him to toughen her up. They told him that the press was part of royal life, that even his mother had endured worse. That's when the comparison to Princess Diana became impossible to ignore. Harry began seeing in Meghan what he saw in his mother before her death: the fragility, the sadness, the forced smiles. The same institution that broke Diana was breaking his wife. But for Meghan, the torment was different. It wasn't just the British media. It was the betrayal within her own family. Her father selling letters. Her half-sister going on TV to mock her. Every private detail twisted for money. And through it all, the palace said nothing. Not one word to protect her. The silence cut deeper than any headline ever could. Friends who visited her during that period say she was barely eating. She would spend hours in the nursery, folding baby clothes that had already been put away, just to distract herself. She stopped answering calls. She avoided mirrors. Her energy began to fade. It was around then that palace insiders started whispering about her health. But they didn't mean physical health. They meant public image. Damage control, not compassion. Meetings were held to manage the situation. Meghan wasn't invited to those meetings. By late 2019, Harry had made up his mind. They needed to leave, or she wouldn't survive. Not emotionally, maybe not even physically. Leaving the royal family was supposed to be their fresh start. But trauma doesn't respect geography. The mind doesn't heal just because the scenery changes. When they arrived in Canada, Meghan hoped for peace. But paparazzi followed them there too. Every move was tracked, every photo sold. Even when they moved to California, tabloids sent drones over their home. She once confided, "It feels like I escaped one prison and entered another." And that's when the first real symptoms began to show. Headaches that wouldn't go away. Random bouts of dizziness. Panic attacks before interviews. Her hands would shake before public appearances, and sometimes she'd lose feeling in her arms. Harry urged her to see a doctor, but Meghan resisted. "If they find out," she said, "they'll say I'm crazy. They'll say I can't handle pressure." The fear of being discredited was stronger than the fear of being ill. It's tragic when you think about it. The same world that demanded perfection from her would have crucified her for being human. And that, experts say, is what makes her case so devastating. Chronic stress doesn't just hurt emotionally, it rewires the brain. The amygdala, the part responsible for fear and anxiety, becomes overactive. The body stays in constant fight or flight mode. Eventually, the nervous system gives out. That's what was happening to Meghan. The palace didn't just break her heart, it altered her biology. Even now, when doctors describe the cause of her neurological disorder, they use words like accumulative emotional trauma and psychological overload. In plain English, she suffered so much for so long that her body simply couldn't take it anymore. It's horrifying, isn't it? That a person can be so relentlessly attacked, isolated, and criticized that her own body turns against her. And yet, through all of this, the institution that claimed to represent compassion and stability said nothing. No public acknowledgement, no empathy, no humanity. When Meghan left the UK, she thought she was leaving her pain behind. But the human mind doesn't work that way. Pain follows. It travels. It waits. The anxiety that began in palace hallways began to resurface in California mansions. The migraines returned. The sleepless nights. The panic. It all came back. Because you can't outrun ghosts. By 2023, things had worsened. Insiders say Meghan began to experience what doctors call neurological burnout. Her brain couldn't regulate stress anymore. Simple things overwhelmed her. Her hands would shake during small tasks. Her speech sometimes slowed. That's when Harry insisted she see a specialist. And that's when everything began to unravel. The doctors' faces said it all before they even spoke. The tests were clear. Meghan's nervous system was in crisis. Her official diagnosis, a stress-induced neurological disorder triggered by prolonged emotional trauma. For most people, that would be enough to break them. But for Meghan, it was something worse. It was proof that the pain she'd been trying to deny had finally won. Her body had become a mirror for everything the crown had taken from her. And yet, she didn't cry that day, not right away. Those who were there say she just stared at the floor for a long time, silent, almost numb. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. It started there, didn't it? The doctor nodded. Meghan whispered. Then I never really left. And with that realization, everything changed. Because the palace she thought she'd escaped wasn't just in England anymore. It was inside her. But what she did next would shock even her closest friends, and force the royal family to confront the truth they'd spent years avoiding. Because Meghan was done hiding. And what she revealed next would make the crown tremble. The California sun shimmered across the glass walls of their Montecito home. But inside, the air was heavy. Meghan sat in silence on the sofa, her laptop open to an unfinished draft of a speech she was supposed to give at a charity event. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for a glass of water. A tremor she had learned to hide with delicate gestures and rehearsed calm. But that morning, she couldn't hide it anymore. Harry noticed. He always did. Meg, that's the third time this week, he said quietly, his tone carrying both worry and guilt. You need to rest. I'm fine, she replied automatically. The same lie she had been repeating for months. But she wasn't fine. Not even close. This was supposed to be their fresh start, the dream life they'd fought so hard for. The sprawling home, the privacy, the freedom to speak their truth. But peace, it turned out, wasn't found in palm trees and million-dollar gardens. It had to come from within, and Meghan's inner world was collapsing. Every day brought new obligations. Netflix calls, brand meetings, charity appearances. The public expected her to be inspirational, flawless, healed. They didn't want Meghan the human being. They wanted Meghan the survivor, polished, poised, and photogenic. But behind that image was a woman unraveling. Friends began noticing her withdrawal. Calls went unanswered. Texts remained unread. Meghan, the woman who once charmed interviewers with wit and poise, now avoided cameras altogether. She used to be the strongest person I knew, said one close friend. But it was like she was fading. The symptoms started subtly. Migraines that left her bedridden, bouts of dizziness, loss of appetite. Soon, she began forgetting things, names, appointments, even lines from prepared speeches. Harry grew alarmed. The woman who could once command a global audience with confidence was now struggling to remember her own words. One evening, after dinner, it happened. Meghan stood to clear the plates, then suddenly froze. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. She looked at Harry, disoriented, unable to speak. For a few terrifying seconds, Her body refused to respond. Harry rushed to her side. Megan. Her eyes fluttered, then she collapsed. That night changed everything. Harry insisted she see a doctor immediately. Meghan resisted at first, terrified that her medical records would somehow leak to the press. If this gets out, she whispered, they'll turn it into another headline. Meghan's mental breakdown. They'll love that. But Harry didn't care. Let them write what they want. I'm not losing you. At the private clinic in Los Angeles, the atmosphere was calm, sterile, but suffocating. The hum of machines, the soft murmur of nurses, it felt far too familiar. Meghan sat in the waiting room, clutching a scarf like it was armor. Cameras might not have been there, but the fear of exposure lingered. Doctors ran a battery of tests, neurological scans, stress hormone levels, and psychological evaluations. Meghan tried to joke about it, but her voice kept trembling. When the results came back, the lead neurologist, a composed woman with kind eyes, explained it gently. You're suffering from a neurological disorder brought on by chronic stress and trauma. Your body has been in survival mode for years, and now it's struggling to regulate itself. Meghan blinked. So you're saying I did this to myself? No, the doctor said firmly. This was done to you. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Those words broke her. She had spent years trying to forget the tabloids, the betrayal, the icy stares, the feeling of being constantly hunted. And yet, every nerve in her body had been storing those memories like silent landmines. The migraines, the tremors, the numbness, none of it was random. It was her body screaming for her to stop pretending. Harry listened in shock, his jaw tightening as the doctor listed symptoms that Meghan had been hiding for months. The guilt washed over him like a wave. He kept thinking about his mother, the late-night tears, the press persecution, the loneliness that ended in tragedy. He squeezed Meghan's hand and whispered, I should have seen this coming. But Meghan just shook her head. You couldn't. I didn't want you to. Later that night, when they got home, Meghan sat in their garden under the moonlight. The air was still. The silence, almost too peaceful. The crown broke me, she murmured, her voice distant. And now I'm paying for it. That quote would soon spread like wildfire once the news leaked, but at that moment, it wasn't for headlines. It was a confession to herself. Because deep down, Meghan had always known she wasn't invincible. She had just never been allowed to admit it. The diagnosis forced her to confront the one truth she had avoided for years. She had never truly healed from what happened in London. The palace, the press, the betrayal. It had all left a mark far deeper than she wanted to believe. Psychologists often describe trauma as an invisible fingerprint left on the nervous system. It reshapes how you think, how you breathe, even how you exist. For Meghan, that meant her body was trapped in a loop, constantly reacting to a threat that no longer existed, but never really disappeared. Even in California, thousands of miles away from Buckingham Palace, her mind was still inside those gilded walls. The panic attacks came without warning. One moment, she'd be laughing with Archie. The next, her chest would tighten, her hands would go numb, her vision would blur. She'd gasp for air, convinced she was dying. Harry held her through each episode, terrified and helpless. We're safe, he'd whisper. You're safe. But trauma doesn't respond to logic. It responds to memory. One night, Meghan finally broke down completely. I keep seeing them, she sobbed. The reporters, the headlines, the way they looked at me. It's like they're still watching. Harry couldn't answer, because he knew she was right. Even in silence, they were being watched. The drones, the telephoto lenses, the gossip blogs, all still there, circling like vultures. And so, what began as physical exhaustion evolved into something darker. Psychological fatigue. Meghan's mind was at war with itself. That's when doctors began a new phase of treatment. Intense therapy sessions to unpack years of emotional repression. The process was brutal. Each week, Meghan had to relive the pain she'd spent years burying. The humiliation, the isolation, the betrayal, the loss. During one session, her therapist asked her to describe her time in the palace in one word. She paused for a long time before whispering, "Lonely." "Why lonely?" the therapist asked. "Because even surrounded by people," Meghan said softly, "I was invisible." That line reportedly brought her therapist to tears. But slowly, painfully, Meghan began to understand what her body had been trying to tell her. She had never processed any of it. She had been surviving, not living. Still, healing wasn't easy. The press began picking up on whispers about her health scare. Tabloids ran stories about Meghan's meltdown, speculating on everything from drug addiction to depression. The cruelty was relentless. But this time, Meghan didn't fight back. She didn't release statements or sue for defamation. She simply disappeared. Those close to her say she spent weeks in silence. No social media, no interviews, no cameras. Just therapy, long walks, and quiet mornings with her children. It was during one of those mornings that she finally understood something crucial. She couldn't control what the world said about her, but she could control how she responded to it. And so began Meghan's transformation. She stopped striving to be perfect. She started allowing herself to be human. When she eventually spoke publicly again, months later, her tone was different. Softer, slower, more grounded. "I'm not who I was when I left the palace," she said. "I'm someone who's learning to breathe again." But as she tried to rebuild, something unexpected happened. A source inside Buckingham Palace leaked the truth about her condition. The diagnosis was no longer private. It was public property. Within hours, headlines across the UK screamed, "Meghan Markle's neurological meltdown." And just like that, the woman trying to heal became a spectacle once more. Harry was livid. He demanded answers. Who leaked it? Why now? And what the palace knew. But behind the scenes, whispers began to circulate that the leak had come from within royal staff. For Meghan, it was déjà vu, betrayal, again. She collapsed into tears that night, saying just one thing: "They won't even let me be sick in peace." But the world wasn't done watching. Because the next person to speak out would change everything. And it wouldn't be Harry or Meghan. It would be someone no one expected. Someone still inside the palace. And when that voice broke the royal silence, the entire narrative flipped upside down. Because for the first time, a senior royal would take Meghan's side, and the fallout would shake the monarchy to its core. The palace walls had always been built for silence. But this time, one of its most guarded voices broke through that centuries-old rule. And the shock wasn't just in what she said, it was in who said it. Princess Anne. Known for her discipline, her no-nonsense attitude, her refusal to indulge in drama, the Princess Royal was the last person anyone expected to speak about Meghan Markle's condition. For years, and had stayed far from the noise surrounding Harry and Meghan, keeping her head down while others whispered behind closed doors. But when the world learned that Meghan had been diagnosed with a stress-induced neurological disorder, and silence cracked. And what she said, though brief, sent ripples through royal corridors. "No woman deserves that level of torment," she told a journalist quietly at a charity event, her tone cool but deliberate. "Not in this family. Not anywhere." That one sentence, 6 words of empathy from the most stoic royal, hit harder than any press release could have. For Meghan, who had felt abandoned by the institution, it was a moment of unexpected validation. For the palace, it was a scandal. Princess Anne had broken the unwritten code: never comment on family matters, never defend the outsiders. But Anne's words weren't just compassion, they were a quiet rebuke to the very system that allowed the situation to spiral. The British press pounced immediately. "Princess Anne breaks ranks over Meghan's illness," screamed one headline. Another read, "Royal solidarity or silent rebellion?" Inside Buckingham Palace, tension flared. Senior courtiers reportedly scrambled to control the narrative, fearing Anne's comment would reignite public sympathy for Meghan. Sympathy the firm had worked years to suppress. But behind the polished statements and polite smiles, something deeper was unraveling. And, sources say, had witnessed firsthand how the institution treated women who struggled under its weight. She had seen it with her mother, the late Queen Elizabeth, quietly bearing emotional pain behind the stoic facade of duty. She had seen it with Diana, who was crushed by the system's refusal to adapt. And now, she was watching history repeat itself with Meghan. "She's strong," and reportedly told a confidant. But strength shouldn't be mistaken for immunity. Even steel bends under pressure. That one line, "even steel bends under pressure," would soon circulate online as millions shared it in solidarity with Meghan. And for the first time in years, the tide of public opinion began to shift. The hashtags #WeStandWithMeghan and #InSaid began trending. Social media flooded with posts comparing Meghan's silent suffering to Diana's torment. Even former palace staffers began to speak anonymously, admitting that there were warnings, signs of Meghan's emotional distress that were dismissed at the time. Meanwhile, Meghan herself remained silent. She didn't post. She didn't respond. She didn't release a statement. But those close to her said she broke down in tears when she read Anne's words. It was like someone finally saw me, Meghan reportedly told a friend. Not as a duchess. Not as a headline. As a person. It's easy to forget that beneath the glitz, the headlines, the politics, there are real human beings with hearts that bruise and minds that can break. Anne's empathy cracked something open that day, not just for Meghan, but for the entire institution. For decades, the royal family had operated like a fortress. Emotion was weakness, vulnerability was scandal. But as Anne's words spread, questions began to echo through the public. How many others had suffered silently? How many more would have to? And what does loyalty mean if it demands the sacrifice of your sanity? Behind the palace gates, damage control began immediately. Press officers rushed to craft statements downplaying Anne's comment. Internal meetings were held. Words like unfortunate phrasing and taken out of context were thrown around. But Anne refused to retract it. She meant every word, one royal insider said flatly. And they know it. For King Charles, it was a nightmare scenario. The monarchy thrives on unity, or at least the illusion of it. And if one of its most respected members had broken ranks, what did that say about the rest? Still, Charles couldn't afford another public feud. So instead of confrontation, he chose silence, the same weapon that had once silenced Diana and later Meghan. But the silence only fueled speculation. Royal commentators began debating whether Anne's statement was an act of rebellion or remorse. Was she speaking on behalf of the family or against it? As the conversation exploded, something unexpected happened. Doctors, psychologists, and trauma specialists began stepping forward, defending Meghan publicly. They explained that chronic emotional stress, especially from public humiliation and long-term anxiety, can rewire the nervous system, leading to neurological symptoms like tremors, memory loss, and even fainting episodes, all of which Meghan had reportedly experienced. For the first time, the narrative shifted from Meghan the drama queen to Meghan the human being. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. It took a princess's quiet compassion to remind the world of Meghan's humanity. And yet, even as Anne's comment ignited a wave of support, it also triggered something far more dangerous inside the palace: fear. Because when public sympathy turns toward an outsider, the royal brand trembles. Behind closed doors, senior aides reportedly launched an internal operation dubbed Project Calm, an effort to refocus media attention away from Meghan's illness and back onto more positive royal engagements. There were sudden appearances by Kate and William, new charity projects, and carefully timed photo ops designed to recapture the headlines. The goal was simple: bury Meghan's story under a flood of feel-good royal news. But the timing gave them away. Audiences noticed the pattern, the strategic distractions, the suspiciously well-timed, happy stories. And the backlash was immediate. "Stop hiding behind smiles," one viral tweet read. "A woman is suffering, and you're scheduling ribbon cuttings." Once again, the firm's silence backfired. Meanwhile, inside Montecito, Meghan was spiraling again. The sudden surge of attention, even if sympathetic, re-triggered her anxiety. The same headlines that praised her also dissected her appearance, her behavior, her tone. "They're still watching," she told Harry one night, her voice trembling. "They always will." Harry tried to comfort her, but this time, words weren't enough. He knew the damage ran deeper than the world could ever see. And yet, amidst all that pain, Anne's words lingered. They became a small light in the darkness, proof that not everyone inside those walls was heartless. One former aide even claimed that Anne privately reached out through a mutual friend, sending Meghan a handwritten note. No official confirmation ever came, but insiders insist it existed. If true, that letter marked something remarkable, a quiet act of defiance wrapped in compassion. Because for all her stoicism, Anne understood something fundamental. The institution survives only as long as it remembers its people are human. And right now, humanity was the one thing the crown was running out of. The palace may have tried to silence the story, but it was too late. The world was listening. The press was digging. And royal aides were whispering. There were rumors of secret emails, memos, even a recorded meeting, documents that showed the palace knew about Meghan's deteriorating health long before she left the UK. If true, it meant one horrifying thing. They could have helped her and chose not to. And if that ever became public, well, the monarchy wouldn't just be facing a PR crisis. It would be facing its reckoning. Because buried beneath the polished walls of Buckingham Palace was a truth that no spin doctor could contain, and Meghan's diagnosis might be the key to unlocking it. But before the world could learn that truth, someone inside decided to intervene, and the next move they made would change everything. Because this time, the Crown wasn't just trying to silence Meghan. It was trying to erase the story altogether. The leak came at midnight. A flurry of frantic messages, deleted emails, and hastily scrubbed social media posts, all hinting at something the palace didn't want anyone to see. A confidential report, allegedly marked internal, sensitive, had surfaced online for just under 10 minutes before it vanished. But 10 minutes was all the internet needed. Screenshots exploded across Twitter, Reddit, and Telegram. The damage was irreversible. The file was supposedly a briefing between royal communications staff and senior advisors. Its contents? A strategy to neutralize the Meghan narrative following her medical diagnosis. Yes, they knew. They knew she was sick. And instead of compassion, they had crafted a plan to manage her illness like a PR problem. One line in particular sent shockwaves through the public. Health matters must not overshadow the institution. Narrative must prioritize royal stability and minimize emotional exposure. Translated, Meghan's breakdown was an inconvenience, not a tragedy. Within hours, hashtags like #RoyalCoverUp and #TheyKnew began trending worldwide. The palace's official channels went silent, and insiders described a state of controlled panic within Buckingham's communications wing. The strategy meetings had gone from damage control to crisis control. But the most haunting question spread faster than the scandal itself. If they knew Meghan was suffering, why didn't they help her? Let's rewind for a second. That document didn't appear from thin air. Sources later confirmed it had been leaked by someone within the palace itself, a senior staffer, disillusioned by years of watching people suffer in silence for the sake of the crown. And that person, according to multiple insiders, was directly connected to Princess Anne's private office. If true, that meant and had gone further than her public statement. She hadn't just spoken, she had acted. And now, the palace was cornered. The world wanted answers. The British press, once the monarchy's fiercest ally, smelled blood. Front pages that usually defended the royals suddenly carried headlines like, "The firm under fire. Internal file reveals how palace handled Meghan's illness. Cold comfort. Leak shows heartless royal response to Markle's condition." Meanwhile, Meghan stayed silent. She had no need to speak. The truth was finally doing it for her. Behind the gates, however, things were far from quiet. Crisis meetings ran late into the night. Royal aides were interrogated. Security protocols were tightened. Phones were seized. King Charles reportedly called for an immediate and complete inquiry. But insiders say the fury wasn't over the lack of empathy. It was over the embarrassment. He didn't want another Diana situation, one source told a London journalist. He wanted control back. Fast. But you can't control a wildfire once it's burning. The more the palace tried to contain it, the more it spread. And then, as if fate had been waiting for the right moment, an audio clip surfaced. A voice memo, dated months before Meghan's diagnosis became public. The recording captured a high-level royal meeting where a senior aide, allegedly one of Charles's own advisors, warned about Meghan's declining mental and physical state. The aide's voice trembled. "She's showing signs of severe stress. If this continues, she could face serious health consequences." A second voice, colder, sharper, responded, "We can't fix every emotional outburst. Focus on perception. If she collapses, we handle the optics." Handle the optics. Those words echoed through every news outlet for days. The same phrase that reportedly enraged Princess Anne, the same phrase that, according to one insider, pushed her to quietly defy protocol and speak out. And while the monarchy scrambled to deny involvement, public sympathy for Meghan surged to unprecedented levels. Online petitions demanding an apology from the royal household gathered millions of signatures. Prominent figures, including mental health advocates and celebrities, began publicly condemning the institution's negligent indifference. Meanwhile, Harry was furious, not just at the leak, but at the system that made it necessary. In private, he allegedly told a friend, "They cared more about protecting the crown than saving her. I won't let them bury her again." And he meant it. That's when Meghan made a decision that would forever redefine how the world saw her. Instead of hiding, she decided to face the truth head-on. No PR team, no palace-approved statement. Just her, raw, vulnerable, and unfiltered. A week later, she announced a live interview. Not with Oprah this time, not with a sympathetic journalist, but with a respected trauma psychologist on a mental health forum broadcast worldwide. The media went wild. The palace went pale. In the days leading up to the interview, Buckingham's PR operation kicked into overdrive. New charity engagements were rushed onto the royal calendar. William and Kate appeared at a children's hospital. Charles was photographed shaking hands with volunteers. Every smile, every photo op, every handshake was perfectly timed to outshine whatever Meghan was about to say. But no amount of orchestration could compete with what came next. The night of the interview, the world tuned in. Meghan appeared on screen, dressed simply, her hair loose, her eyes heavy but calm. There was no designer backdrop, no calculated glamour. Just a woman ready to tell the truth. When asked what the diagnosis had taught her, Meghan paused. The silence stretched. Then she said softly, "That silence is the most dangerous thing you can give pain. Because pain grows in silence." You could hear a pin drop. She went on to describe the years of emotional strain she endured, not just from the press, but from within the royal institution itself. How she begged for support and was met with indifference. How her pleas for therapy were politically inconvenient. How she was told, "You're fine, just smile." Her voice trembled, but she didn't cry. Not once. "I believed if I just stayed quiet long enough, it would stop," she said. But trauma doesn't fade when you ignore it. It waits. It lives in your body. Until one day, it forces you to listen. Those words hit like thunder. Across social media, viewers flooded timelines with messages of empathy and outrage. Mental health professionals praised her courage. Newspapers across Europe ran front-page headlines calling it the speech that shamed the palace. But not everyone in the royal household was unmoved. Princess and, according to insiders, sent Meghan a private message the next day. It contained only 7 words. "You spoke the truth. Don't stop now." Those 7 words would become the turning point of the entire saga. Because while Meghan's bravery won hearts, it also exposed something deeper, a fracture within the royal family itself. Behind the palace doors, Charles and William clashed over how to respond. William reportedly pushed for a firm rebuttal, a statement denying Meghan's claims. Charles, fearing further fallout, preferred silence. The argument grew heated. One insider described it as the loudest shouting match since Diana's funeral planning. For decades, the monarchy's greatest weapon was control. Control of narrative, of image, of emotion. But this time, control was slipping. And as the public demanded accountability, whispers began to surface about a long-buried internal review, an inquiry commissioned after Diana's death to address the emotional resilience of royal family members. A review that, according to new leaks, was quietly shelved decades ago. If those files were ever revealed, they could expose a chilling pattern, proof that the monarchy had ignored the mental health of its own members for generations. The storm was no longer about Meghan. It was about them. Because if Meghan's illness was the symptom, then the institution itself was the disease. And when the next revelation came, one so personal, so intimate, that even the palace couldn't bury it, it would shatter the illusion of royal strength once and for all. Because buried deep within Meghan's medical records was something no one expected, something that connected her pain not just to her time in the palace, but to the royal bloodline itself. And when that secret came to light, the monarchy's walls would tremble. When the truth finally surfaced, it didn't come from a tabloid, a documentary, or a leak. It came from the medical report itself. A report so detailed, so specific, that even the palace's most skilled handlers couldn't spin it. It began as a standard disclosure. Meghan's medical team had filed her full diagnostic report as part of her ongoing treatment plan: neurological mapping, hormonal studies, and trauma history correlations. But hidden in those pages was something that sent shockwaves through everyone who saw it. According to the attending specialists, Meghan's neurological disorder wasn't just triggered by emotional trauma, it was genetically predisposed. A dormant condition that, under extreme psychological pressure, can awaken and rapidly deteriorate. And that genetic marker? It was inherited. From her father's side? No. The report stated something chillingly unexpected. The predisposition was maternal, passed through her mother, Doria Ragland, and traceable, in scientific language, to generational trauma patterns often observed in families with histories of prolonged social or emotional stress. In plain English, Meghan's body was carrying the echoes of her ancestors' pain. It was a phrase one of her doctors reportedly used during her consultation. "This didn't start with you, Meghan. You're the first in your line to feel safe enough to collapse." That line broke her. For years, Meghan had believed that her suffering was a consequence of fame, of the crown, of media cruelty. But now she faced something deeper: the haunting possibility that she was born carrying a history of unhealed pain. And yet, what made it even more staggering was how closely that revelation paralleled another story, one the palace had kept buried for decades. Because buried in an internal psychological file from the 1990s, created in the aftermath of Princess Diana's death, was a nearly identical description of intergenerational emotional sensitivity. In short, Diana's mental strain had also been worsened by inherited trauma responses. Yes, the late Princess of Wales and Meghan Markle, though worlds apart in background, shared a chilling medical parallel. Both carried predispositions to nervous system disorders linked to stress and trauma. It wasn't superstition. It wasn't speculation. It was science. And if true, it meant the monarchy's centuries-old culture of silence didn't just destroy women. It literally rewired their descendants. The moment that revelation reached the media, a hush fell across London. News anchors spoke in solemn tones. Medical experts began dissecting the implications. Psychologists called it the generational curse of repression. For the public, it was horrifying. For the palace, it was catastrophic. Because this wasn't just about Meghan anymore. This was about every woman who had ever been told to keep her composure while she fell apart inside those walls. The late Queen's stoicism, Diana's tears, Meghan's collapse. The pattern was undeniable, and now medically proven. And yet, behind the headlines and outrage, Meghan was going through something even more profound, a reckoning with her own identity. She had spent years trying to separate herself from her royal past, trying to rebuild a life defined by her own choices. But now she was faced with a truth that connected her not only to Diana, but to the legacy of women who had suffered silently for generations, both royal and not. The emotional weight of that realization was unbearable. In her next therapy session, Meghan reportedly broke down completely. "It's not just my pain anymore," she told her therapist. "It's theirs too. All the women who came before me. I feel them." Her therapist replied gently, "Then maybe healing yourself is how you heal them." That session marked a turning point. For the first time, Meghan stopped fighting her illness as an enemy and began to see it as a messenger. Her body wasn't betraying her. It was begging her to stop carrying what wasn't hers. That shift was subtle but seismic. She began journaling daily, confronting memories she had buried, the palace dinners where she smiled through humiliation, the nights she held back tears for fear of looking weak, the days she wished she could disappear. And she wrote one sentence that would later resurface in her upcoming memoir draft. "I thought the crown broke me, but maybe it was trying to show me where I was already broken." Meanwhile, The palace was unraveling. Inside Buckingham, panic turned to paranoia. Senior aides demanded tighter control over leaks. But it was too late. Public trust had cracked. Newspapers that once printed flattering photos of royal charity events now ran exposés titled, "The Crown's Silent Epidemic: How the Monarchy Weaponized Emotional Suffering." Mental health foundations began calling for accountability. Even prominent figures who had once criticized Meghan were now changing their tone. Piers Morgan, of all people, was suddenly quiet. That silence spoke louder than any rant. Behind the scenes, King Charles reportedly summoned his closest advisors for an emergency briefing. "This must not divide the family," he said, pacing the room. "We can't let the crown become the villain." But that was the problem. The villain wasn't the crown itself. It was the culture built around it. The coldness, the detachment, the obsession with optics over empathy. And for the first time, the public wasn't buying it anymore. When Meghan finally appeared in public weeks later, she looked fragile but composed. She was photographed walking hand in hand with Harry outside a clinic in Santa Barbara. No makeup, no jewelry, no entourage. The image went viral instantly, not because she looked glamorous, but because she looked human. Comments flooded in from around the world. "She's been through hell. She deserves peace. She's Diana's justice." But beneath that fragile calm, Meghan was wrestling with a decision that would determine everything that came next. She had been offered something unexpected, a private request from King Charles himself. A meeting, a conversation to clear the air, as his letter phrased it. It wasn't a trap. It was an olive branch. At least, that's how it was presented. But for Meghan, the decision wasn't simple. Could she really walk back into the same world that nearly destroyed her? Could she sit across from the man whose silence had contributed to her suffering? Harry urged caution. "They'll never change," he warned. But Meghan wasn't sure anymore. Because deep down, part of her wanted to face it, to see if there was even a shred of remorse left in those halls. Her therapist encouraged her to go, not for reconciliation, but for closure. "You don't go for them," she said softly. "You go for yourself." So Meghan agreed. But she set one rule: no cameras, no press, no staff. Just her and the king. The date was quietly arranged, a private visit to Highgrove House. Harry stayed behind with the children. He didn't want her to go alone, but Meghan insisted. "If I can survive the palace once," she told him, "I can face it one last time." That morning, she wore something simple, a beige coat, her hair tied back, no jewelry except her wedding ring. Witnesses later said she looked like a woman walking into history. When her car pulled through the gates of Highgrove, the guards fell silent. She stepped out, her expression unreadable. Inside, King Charles was waiting. Older, thinner, the weight of monarchy etched across his face. The air between them was tense, but fragile. He gestured toward the sitting room. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. And in that single moment, two worlds collided, the old and the new, the father-in-law and the woman who nearly broke his crown. They sat opposite each other. Silence filled the room. Finally, Charles spoke. "You've been through more than anyone should." Meghan nodded, tears threatening but restrained. "You could have stopped it." He looked down. "Perhaps, but you know what this life demands." Her reply was sharp but calm. "No, that's what it used to demand." That conversation, brief, emotional, raw, would become one of the most pivotal in modern royal history. Because what Charles said next, and what Meghan did afterward, would redefine the monarchy's legacy forever. And when word of that meeting leaked, and it inevitably would, the world would discover that healing isn't quiet. It's revolutionary. But what exactly happened inside Highgrove? What did Charles confess? And what truth did Meghan leave behind when she walked away from that house for the last time? The answer to that question, what was said behind those walls, would change everything the public thought they knew about both of them. And no one, not even Meghan, was prepared for the consequences that followed. Inside Highgrove, the air was heavy with history. The kind of air that carried both apology and pride, a suffocating mix that made silence louder than words. Meghan sat across from King Charles, her hands clasped in her lap, her pulse steady but her heart in revolt. The ticking of an antique clock filled the room. Each second felt like it was counting down to something inevitable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The king studied her, not as a monarch, but as a man who had run out of excuses. Meghan, for her part, had promised herself she wouldn't cry. Not here. Not now. Finally, Charles broke the silence. You know, he began quietly, his voice frail. I never wanted it to come to this. Meghan tilted her head, the faintest trace of disbelief crossing her face. Didn't you? She asked softly. Because from where I stood, it seemed like silence was exactly what you wanted. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sharp, visible, impossible to ignore. Charles sighed, looking down at his hands. The institution, it doesn't bend easily. It doesn't know how to love without fear of scandal. That's not love, Meghan replied. That's control. He looked up at her then, eyes tired, watery. You're not wrong. That admission startled her more than she expected. For a split second, she saw the man beneath the crown, the aging father, haunted by the ghosts of his past, the mistakes he had inherited and repeated. I thought, Charles continued, that by keeping quiet, I was protecting the family. I didn't see that I was destroying one. Meghan exhaled, her composure trembling. You watched me fall apart. You watched your own son beg for help. You let the world call me a liar, a manipulator, a fraud. And you said nothing. I said nothing, Charles interrupted. Because if I had spoken, truly spoken, they would have turned on me too. There it was. The confession, not from a king, but from a man ruled by the very system he led. Meghan leaned forward, her voice softening but her words cutting through the quiet. So you sacrificed your family to save your throne. Charles didn't answer right away. He looked toward the window, where rain had begun to fall over the Highgrove Gardens. I sacrificed peace, he said finally. And peace is harder to earn than power. It was the closest thing to an apology she would ever get. For a long moment, they sat in silence again, the kind of silence that only two people who have both been broken by the same machine can share. Charles broke it with a whisper. You remind me of her. Diana. The name wasn't spoken, but it didn't need to be. Meghan's breath caught. You mean because I refused to stay silent? He gave a small, weary smile. Because you refused to die pretending. That line hit her like a wave. In those 8 words, everything, all the tension, all the guilt, all the generational pain, collapsed into something both tragic and tender. The king's eyes glistened. I loved her. I did. But I didn't know how to love someone the world wouldn't allow to exist. And then I did the same thing to you. Meghan's throat tightened. She hadn't expected this level of honesty. Certainly not from him. You don't get to fix this with words, she said quietly. Not with me. Not anymore. I know, he replied. But I had to say it before I go. That stopped her cold. Before you go? Charles looked away. There's a reason I wanted to see you now. My doctors, they've advised I prepare. It's nothing imminent, but... Meghan froze. Her mind raced. Was this confession born out of guilt or mortality? He continued. I didn't want to leave this world without saying what I should have said long ago. I'm sorry. The room seemed to shrink around them. For a moment, Meghan forgot the cameras, the tabloids, the headlines. It was just them, 2 wounded souls tethered by a name that had destroyed them both. But compassion doesn't erase history. She nodded slowly, her voice steady but distant. I accept your apology. But you need to understand, forgiveness isn't reconciliation. He nodded. I do. They sat there for a while longer, speaking quietly about Archie and Lilibut, about Harry, about the future of the family neither of them truly belonged to anymore. At one point, Charles showed her a framed photograph of Diana and the young princes, tucked away behind a stack of letters. Meghan stared at it for a long time before whispering, she'd be proud of him, you know. Charles's voice cracked. I know. And she'd be proud of you too. A single tear slid down Meghan's cheek, not because she believed him completely, but because she needed to hear it. When she finally stood to leave, Charles rose slowly. He reached out, not as a monarch, but as a father-in-law seeking grace. You have your strength back, he said softly. Don't let them take it again. Meghan paused at the door. They can't, she said, her voice low, almost resolute. Because I finally know who I am without them. And with that, she turned and walked out of Highgrove. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, letting through narrow bands of sunlight that spilled over the gravel path. Meghan stepped into it, into the light, and for the first time in years, it didn't burn. It felt like freedom. But as her car pulled away, a royal aide rushed into the study behind her, pale-faced and breathless. Your Majesty, the aide said, holding a phone. It's out. Charles's eyes narrowed. What's out? The footage, sir. Someone recorded the meeting. The king froze. What do you mean, recorded? Every word, the aide said grimly. The apology. The conversation. It's online. The world's already watching. Outside, the storm had ended. But inside Buckingham Palace, another one had just begun. Because the one thing the monarchy feared more than scandal had finally happened. The truth had escaped the crown's control. And what came next would tear the royal narrative apart piece by piece, exposing not only their secrets, but the soul of an institution built on silence. For Meghan, the meeting was supposed to be closure. For the monarchy, it became Judgment Day.